This weekend at the box office, Alita battles its way to number 1, while the Lego Movie 2 begins to disassemble, and Isn't It Romantic capitalizes on the corporate card-giving holiday that is Valentine's Day. All this and more on this episode of The Weekend Take.
You're listening to The Weekend Take, and now your host, Sean Schaefer.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Weekend Take. I'm your host, Sean Schaefer, and with me this week is cinematographer, editor, animator, and director of video and motion for Over It Media, Solomon Nero. Solomon, how are you doing?
Good, how you doing, Sean? Thanks for having me on.
Glad to have you on, and for those of you new to the show, what The Weekend Take is, it's a weekly podcast that breaks down the weekend box office results, but also looks beyond the numbers at the current topics, trends, and talking points of the film industry. So we'll get things kicked off the way we do with every episode, looking at the films that left the top 10. This week, there were 3 such instances, as Miss Bala dropped from number 10 down to number 14 this week from Sony, taking in $970,000, a 64.7% drop from last week. The film lost roughly half of its screens, losing 1,031 screens to bring its count down to 1,172, a per-screen average of $828 to bring its cume up to $13.8 million on a $15 million budget in its third week of release. The next film to leave the top 10 this week was Aquaman, dropping from the number 8 position down to number 12 from Warner Brothers. The film took in $1.8 million, only a 41.1% drop. The film saw a loss of just under half of its screens, losing 938 screens, bringing its count down to 1,264. Per screen average still roughly around $1,500 per screen, and it's brought its cume up to $331 million domestically and a worldwide cume of just under $1.2 billion in its 9th week of release. And lastly, leaving the top 10 is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse from Sony, dropping from the number 9 position down to number 11. Spider-Man took in $1.9 million, a 35.4% drop, losing about a third of its screens. It lost 519 screens to bring its count down to 1,207 screens, a per-screen average of just over $1,600 per screen to bring its cume up to $182.7 million in its 10th week of release on a $90 million budget. So Solomon, looking at the 3 films that left the top 10, were any of these surprises to you?
I wouldn't say so, but Into the Spider-Verse kind of hung in there longer than I thought, honestly. I mean, I know its Academy recognition is up there, but I mean, it's 10 weeks. I mean, I don't know about you. Maybe I'm out of the movie theater game, but it seems pretty long for a film like that. It's a good lifespan to be up in the top 10.
In most cases, even during a slow time of the year like this, you're looking at about a 6 to 8 week at max life expectancy, unless you're bolstered by award nominations, which Spider-Man is. It won Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature, and it's got an Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Feature, so that certainly helped. It did hang in there 1 week longer than Aquaman did. Aquaman only 9 weeks in release, Spider-Man with 10, so that has to say something to the strength of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now, you have seen Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, yes?
Yes, I have.
And what were your thoughts on it?
This film was surprisingly refreshing. I actually went in with the viewpoint, like, you know, we've seen the Sam Raimi, we've seen 3 different iterations of this character, and who happens to be actually one of my favorite comic book characters of all time. But I was a little skeptical of the whole multiverse thing. I know they covered that in some of the comic book series, and I always kind of strayed away from it, so I was a little concerned, but it was very surprising. And also, just with my time originally being a 3D animator, what a visual treat. Just the color palette, the style, everything used was very tasteful. There was only one visual thing I wasn't too happy with, but other than that, it was just astounding. That wasn't totally what they leaned on. The story and the characters, everything just came together very, very well. I was very pleasantly surprised.
Did you have any thoughts on the other 2 films that left, either Aquaman or Miss Bala?
When I saw the trailers for both, for one, I mean, Aquaman, in my humble opinion, and I could be very well wrong, but I feel like that's more of a look at me, I'm Jason Mimosa, as I call him. No, look at me, I'm hot, I'm this, I'm that. Which is, I guess, many films, but it seemed like with the whole DC universe, I felt like they were kind of coasting off of that. I heard from friends and different resources that it was received pretty well. I'm still very, very skeptical. Superhero movies, I've enjoyed a lot of the Marvel superhero movies with the understanding that I have to try to shut off a certain storytelling part of my brain. Now, Miss Bala and Gina Rodriguez, she's been, she's kind of coming up in the ranks a bit. Now she's going to be in Carmen Sandiego, as I heard that through one of your other podcasts. That's pretty cool. So to see her in this role, it looks like her performance just in the preview is really outstanding. But it also kind of seemed like with the budget, I believe the budget was pretty low for this type of film. So immediately before I even knew who she was or anything like that, it felt more like an overseas cash grab.
Just happened to take a look because you're mentioning like an overseas cash grab. Miss Bala is certainly not that, it appears, because its foreign gross is totaled out right now at $73,000.
Oh my God. All right.
I really felt the marketing was misdirected by Sony. They directed it directly towards the demographic of more of a Hispanic audience when Gina Rodriguez herself appeals to a much broader audience. And I think that was a bit of a failure on their part.
Number 10.
All right, so now we're going to get into our top 10, and kicking it off at number 10, down from number 7 this week, is Green Book from Universal, taking in $2.7 million, only a 20% drop from last week. The film lost 531 screens to bring its total down to 1,618 screens. It averaged $1,700 per screen to bring its cume up to $65.7 million in its 14th week of release on a $23 million budget. The Green Book is a prime example of a film that has been bolstered by the awards season. It's 5 Academy Award nominations for leading men Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali, Viggo being nominated for Best Actor, Mahershala being nominated for Best Supporting Actor, as well as being nominated for Best Screenplay, Best Picture, and Best Editing, certainly help to increase audience intrigue into the film, as well as its critical acclaim up to this point. Solomon, are you familiar with Green Book? Do you have thoughts on the film?
Again, this is another film that I really have wanted to see even before its nomination. I've liked the different types of characters that Viggo has kind of been cast in over the years, and Mahershala Ali, ever since I saw the first season of House of Cards, he just has a presence on screen that I really think is really awesome. But to see the recognition from the Academy in these different categories definitely has me even more interested to see it. Just seeing the previous Viggo's character, it's definitely unlike anything I've seen. The character seems really, really, really different from what he's usually doing, and I like it. I mean, as a fan of the whole Italian scene, I'm Italian myself. I thought he pulled it off quite well. What I saw, it looks like a nice character mashup, especially in that era.
The bigger surprise for me, and I discussed it a little bit with John Romeo last week on the show, is that this film was directed by Peter Farrelly of the Farrelly Brothers.
Oh, that's right. Yes, that is really interesting. I haven't even heard his name in probably probably 2 decades. It's been a long time since I even heard what he's up to. That's awesome.
And he also was part of the screenwriting team as well, as he's listed on the nominees for Best Screenplay. I'm really glad to see that happen. I'm glad to see him hopefully now being taken a bit more seriously, getting away from the kind of frat boy slapstick comedies of the 90s and early aughts. We know the Academy Awards are next Sunday, and Green Book having 5 nominations in Best Picture, Best Actor in Viggo Mortensen, Best Supporting Actor for Mahershala Ali, Best Editing and Best Screenplay. And up to this point, Mahershala Ali has run the table at every stop along the way this award season, winning for his performance. What are the chances that Mahershala Ali wins at the Academy Awards? And if anything else, what would you see Green Book taking home next Sunday?
I definitely think, without seeing it myself, just based on what I know and what I've heard, I really think Mahershala Ali can take it. Who's he running up against? I guess that would actually probably be a really good thing to look at, is who's he contending with.
So at this year's Academy Awards, Mahershala Ali in the Best Supporting Actor category is up against Sam Elliott for A Star Is Born, Adam Driver for Black Klansman, Richard E. Grant from Can You Ever Forgive Me, and Sam Rockwell for Vice. It's a pretty stacked group of talent that he's up against, but it's also the same group of talent that he's roughly been in the nominations with all along this award season, and he's managed to walk away with an award at each of those. So
yeah, that's a good point. I really didn't, considering who else he's up against. I mean, he's up against a really big wall of talent. He's pulled it off in the past, so I think it's anyone's game at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're all just going to have to tune in Sunday and see if Mahershala Ali can, in fact, run the table and take home an Oscar.
Number 9.
So moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 9. Down from number 6 this week is The Prodigy from Orion, taking in $3.1 million, a 46.2% drop from last week. Its theater count did not change. It held steady at 2,530 screens, a per-screen average of just over $1,200 to bring its cume up to $11 million in its second week of release on a $6 million budget. Now, this genre horror picture from Orion, which is a studio we haven't really heard much from in quite some time, but has a couple of releases actually in 2019 to look forward to, is trending well. I mean, it only lost 46%, which, considering it had another genre horror film and a sequel at that in Happy Death Day to You to compete against, the fact that it only lost 46%, I think speaks well of perhaps the quality of the film. It's trending a little bit better on Rotten Tomatoes and some other films that we would expect to do well. And on CinemaScore, it's ranked right now at a C+, which puts it right smack dab in the middle of people on the fence of either liking it or disliking it. So looking at The Prodigy, Solomon, do you have any thoughts on this film in particular, or this type of genre horror film in general?
Anyone who knows me knows that you can't take me to go see one of these kinds of films, because I'm the guy who's constantly like making fun of it and laughing when there's a jump scare, and laughing at some of the tropes. Like, horror movies in general oftentimes are just so unrealistic that it just makes me laugh. And the thing is, I don't know why horror, I can't suspend disbelief as much with horror, because it typically takes place, it's supposed to take place anyway, in like some type of reality. It's not like some science fiction thing or whatever, but for whatever reason, my brain just, whenever I sit down in front of a horror movie, I'm like, okay, this would really be happening. Can it? No, and typically it doesn't. So I'm usually the worst person to ask this question, because I just think they're funny. That being said, Taylor Schilling, I believe is her name, the lead. I really liked her in Orange is the New Black. I'm actually kind of interested to see how she does in something like this. My guess would she would do pretty well. But other than that, that's probably my only interest in this film, is to see her performance in another venue, because I haven't seen her in anything else. I'm sure she's done other films, so I'm interested to see her in this arena and see how she does, especially in the horror genre. That's definitely going to push her chops a little bit. Yeah, other than that, there's not really much interest I have in these types of things. I think they're the more comical to me when they probably are not meant to be.
I mean, one of my takeaways from The Prodigy is the fact that I feel like Jackson Robert Scott, who plays Miles, the main character in this film, is going to kind of become typecast at this point. For those of you that don't know, the young boy who plays Miles in The Prodigy, Jackson Robert Scott, is also Georgie from the reboot of It that came out last year, and is rumored to play young Georgie, obviously, in It Chapter 2 later this year. So here he is again in a dark and horror film-like role at such a young age. Kind of makes me wonder if this young man's future roles offered to him are going to circle around the same kind of horror film genre.
That's kind of unfortunate. I mean, hey, it's going to get him out there. I mean, he can try to break away, but usually in these types of situations, it can be very, very challenging to get out of those typecasts. But we'll see.
I mean, and given Happy Death Day to You, which we'll talk about later in the countdown, its performance and the fact that it will be hanging around the top 10 at least for another week, I think we'll be discussing The Prodigy, which, debuted at number 6 last week, dropped to number 9 this week. I feel like we'll be discussing The Prodigy leaving the top 10 next week when we report. But for Orion, on a $6 million budget, having already made $11 million domestically, and it's still having probably at least a few more weeks in its run, has to be pretty happy about taking home a bit of a profit on this film as they look forward to the Child's Play reboot that they'll be releasing later this year.
Oh, God. Movies that don't need reboots.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 8.
So moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 8. Down from number 5 this week is Glass from Universal, taking in $3.8 million, only a 38.5% drop from last week. The film lost about 800 screens to bring its theater count down to 2,449, just under $1,600 per screen average to bring its cume up to $104.4 million in its 5th week of release on a $20 million budget. So with Glass, as of this weekend, crosses the $100 million mark domestically, which for director M. Night Shyamalan, that makes his 6th film that he's directed to have done so. Previously, he had The Village, The Last Airbender, Split, which Glass is a continuation of, Signs, and, of course, The Sixth Sense. Solomon, have you seen Glass, or previously did you watch Unbreakable and Split?
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this one. And what's funny is I haven't even seen this film. When I saw the film Unbreakable, it totally changed everything for me when it came to like science fiction and just like the whole genre. It took this concept that was ridiculous. I mean, let's face it, I love comic books and comic book heroes, but the concept's ridiculous. It took it and brought it into this realm of what if it could be real? What would it look like? And M. Night Shyamalan was one of my favorite directors for a while when I was young, and he just started throwing out turd after turd. Unfortunately, as much as I hate to say that, just a lot of really poorly received films, and a lot of them I can say I haven't even watched just because I felt betrayed. I was like, M. Night, dude, what are you doing, man? You were doing so well. What happened?
What was the film that turned you off to him?
I mean, Last Airbender was when I was like, okay, for one, I'm not that familiar with it, but when I heard like what people who enjoyed the series were saying about it, and I just watched some clips from it, I was like, wow, that is just terrible. But then I think I gave him another chance with After Earth, and it's so funny. Wait, no. Let me back up. Was it The Happening? Was that the name of the movie?
Bigger mistake.
What's that?
I said if you said After Earth, I would have said mistake, and then you said The Happening. I said bigger mistake.
Dude, no, okay. So The Happening, I mean, oh my God. Split, when it came out, I was like, I mean, James McAvoy, awesome. Love James McAvoy. But I was like, it's a horror movie. I'm not interested. And then I heard the spoiler that it's tied to Unbreakable. I was like, I have to see it. So I saw it, and I was like, I really enjoyed the movie. Very much so. From a horror movie standpoint, I was able to, maybe it's because I was able to see it in the lens of being in the same universe as Unbreakable. I was able to put that aside, and I was able to enjoy it. So when this movie was announced and I got to see this, I was so excited. Since its release, the feedback I have heard, I am so discouraged. So discouraged that I'm actually afraid to go see it. I want to go see it. I am just so scared to see what is happening to one of my favorite movies, probably of all time. That's probably one of my favorite. Unbreakable is probably one of my favorite movies of all time. Now I just don't know. I want to see it, but I'm freaked out.
You know, the beauty of living in 2019 is if you don't want to spend your hard-earned dollars to spend $14 to go see it at the multiplex, give it 2 more months and you'll be able to watch it on Netflix or iTunes or some other streaming or VOD platform.
The way I see it, it is not even about the money. I'm so willing to spend the money on this film. I think every time I've gone to be like, you know what, I'm going to take a break from work, I'm going to go check this out, I'm just like, is he going to ruin it for me? Is this going to go bad? And then I'm just like, you know what, I'll go next week. And then it just never happens. It's I shouldn't be driven by fear, but I'll be honest, that's kind of where it is at this point.
I mean, it's only got a 37% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Right. I mean, okay, I'm going to give you a little secret. I typically find I'm usually right in the middle, leaning a little closer towards the critics. So when I see a tomato score like 37% critic and then 75% audience in this case, I think, okay, it's going to have fun elements that's going to appeal to the mass audience, but the person who really likes that depth and that really interesting side of things is going to be disappointed. Is it a movie that I can just shut off and just enjoy? I don't know. I'm interested to find out, but it's going to have to wait, I guess.
Number 7.
We are now up to number 7. Down from number 4 this week is The Upside from STX Entertainment, taking in $5.5 million, only a 21.1% drop from last week, which seems to be the trend of this film, these small incremental drops, as The Upside continues to be quite the overachiever at the box office. It only lost 591 screens this week, bringing its count down to 2,781, still averaging over 2,000 per screen, as its cume is now up to $94.1 million in its 6th week of release on a $37.5 million budget. So as I've mentioned in weeks past with The Upside, this film seemingly goes completely against the grain of all the things that would normally make a film like this be dead on arrival. To quickly recap, from the 2 leading men being Kevin Hart and Bryan Cranston, each dealing with their own particular controversies. Kevin Hart's with his Twitter account leading him to step down from the Oscars. Bryan Cranston dealing with backlash of him portraying a quadriplegic when he's not actually quadriplegic. The fact that the film was delayed for over a year, which is usually the last nail in the coffin for most films that get just quietly released in this January-February timeframe, is that over a year delay, and that the previous entity that owned the film was the Weinstein Group, which of course had its own myriad controversies leading up to its bankruptcy. Solomon, what are your thoughts on The Upside, either the film itself or these factors that should have been red flags leading up to its release?
First off, I just have to ask the question, because I've never actually officially looked into it, but is this a remake of The Untouchables?
It is.
It is. Okay. I thought that movie was just wonderful. It was so good. And then I see that this is being made, and I'm almost like, come on. Why do us Americans have to do this? I do want it to do well, so I am glad it's doing well. I am very interested to see it. The barriers that this film is facing, you're right. These types of things usually lead to a movie being released very, very quietly. Marketing budgets are low. They're just trying to get it out the door, recoup as much as they can, and then just move on to the next project. So it's really good to see that this actually that wasn't the trend for this. It actually did have some success, so I'm really glad to see that. Kevin Hart himself, he's he's very comical to watch on screen. He's just a ridiculous human being. In a good way. I say it lovingly. Bryan Cranston is what a wonderful success story. Like he had that whole thing with Malcolm in the Middle, and it's like, yeah, he was just kind of known. Then Breaking Bad, he just blew up. I'm so happy for him. This is one I definitely adding to the long list of films I need to see.
Are you speaking of Bryan Cranston, are you looking forward to the Breaking Bad movie being released to Netflix from AMC?
It's very funny you mentioned that. I was working really hard on a project when I heard that, and I stopped and actually got mad. And I said, what? What are they doing? So now I don't know what to think, because I actually just forgot about it because I was really busy. So I went back to work and I kind of forgot about it. So now, now hearing that, I'm actually now getting these emotions again. Like, what's this going to be about? I don't know. I'm going to have a very cautious optimism for it. But at the same time, I definitely wouldn't be surprised if this was not very good.
For the upside, it's great to see it performing as well as it has been. STX's second highest grossing film release they've had, number one being Bad Moms, which is at 113 million domestic. So if I'm the upside, I'm really hoping to take that crown. I mean, if it keeps up marginal drops like this, it's not without reason that it possibly could do that.
Number 6.
So moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 6. Down from number 3 this week is Cold Pursuit from Lionsgate, taking in $6 million, a 45.6% drop from last week. Its theater count held steady at 2,630 screens, a $2,281 per theater average. It has brought its cume up to $21.1 million in its second week of release. Now, Cold Pursuit with Liam Neeson was the latest in a trend of films like The Upside that suffered from a bit of foot-and-mouth syndrome. Liam Neeson, the week leading up to the film's release, in an interview revealed a part of his past that a lot of people immediately jumped on him about. Are you familiar with what happened with Liam Neeson, Solomon?
No, I'm not. What happened?
In an interview, Liam Neeson was talking about his character in the film. And during an interview, he was talking with a reporter and brought up a part of his past where when he was a young man, about 40 years ago, a female friend of his was raped. And he asked her to describe him. And all that she could describe was that it was a black man that was responsible. So Liam Neeson admitted that for 2 weeks, he walked around carrying basically the equivalent of a billy club to find a black man to beat the crap out of, were his exact words.
Yeah.
So there's a huge backlash over it. Everyone immediately jumps on. Clearly, he's a racist if he's just looking for a black man to beat the crap out of. The fact that he can come out and admit it, and for him as an actor, maybe that's where he went to in his mind to get the motivation for this character, which if he said that he still felt that way, then yeah, we have a problem. But it's not like he's still wandering around Northern Ireland with a billy club looking for a black man to beat the crap out of. He got very enraged as a young man in his 20s that this person very close to him suffered such a trauma, and he immediately wanted to seek retribution. I don't think Liam Neeson's a racist. What are your thoughts on this ordeal?
I mean, I'll be frank with you. When the media hears these things and people just get outraged, it's like they're just looking for reasons to be outraged. I want our listeners to put themselves in their position. You're a young man and a friend, someone you care about, just had something terrible done to them, and the only descriptive factor is it's just one thing. It's all they had. So at that point, your anger's so high, you're literally just looking somewhere to put that out on. It could have been it was a white guy. He probably would have felt the same thing towards any white guy. I don't feel like something like this would be a racist thing. It just happened to be that this person only had one thing to describe this person as, and it happened to be color. But I don't think that's enough for someone, especially the way you were saying, like he's remorseful. That is a clear indication that that's something that this person has moved on from. I think everyone in the media and everyone who gets mad at that kind of stuff should really just relax just a little bit. It's going to be okay. The movie itself, again, I have not seen, but the premise looks interesting. It looks fun just because there's a lot of humor, at least in the trailer. There seemed to throw a lot of humor into this rough situation, but I can definitely see him pulling from an experience like that. I mean, I bet he probably did something similar for like Taken. I mean, that was, which is pretty much started, him being thrown into this genre of this like revenge action movie. I could definitely see that being as like a contributing, source that he pulled from when he's acting in those films, which I don't think is bad at all.
So Liam Neeson's also said that Cold Pursuit is probably his last foray into this genre, where we find Liam Neeson playing a guy who used to do a thing that doesn't do a thing anymore, but then something happens, and now he has to find those responsible for it using his special set of skills.
Yes. No, I'm glad to see him hang up the cape, but I'm kind of glad to see that he has found a lot of success in that, and I'm really happy for him. But at the same time, I'm just kind of like, yeah, I'm looking forward to them being distant memories and holding up the good movies that came out of that. I hope will stand the test of time. I'll be honest with you. I watch Taken maybe once a year. I think that film was just so well done. I can definitely see how that launched him into this type of film. But I'm actually really happy to see him do something else. I'm really hoping to see some more depth-based films that he can be in. I think it's going to be really exciting to see.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
Now we've reached the point in our show where we take an aside and we get to know our guest a little better. So this week we have Solomon Nero, who I mentioned is a cinematographer, editor, animator, and director of video and motion for Overt Media. So Solomon, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, currently I'm like you're saying, I'm the director of video and motion animation at Overt Media, which is an ad agency in Albany, New York. I've been here for almost 2 years now. Before that, I was a freelance cinematographer and animator and even sometimes VFX artist. It's really different to go from having all these different types of projects, and which I still do have at Overt, but oftentimes I'm doing all that work. I'd usually focus on like maybe 2 major projects at a time, and maybe with another small one here and there, and that would be my workload. But at something like an agency, I'm not only responsible for the cinematography and the editing and post-production and all that, I'm also responsible for an entire department. So sometimes I'll only be shooting or editing maybe 10% of the time on one week, and the rest of the week I'll be in meetings and giving quotes and doing all sorts of different kinds of things. So it's definitely been different. My whole career has been it's been in the trenches. And this one's a little bit more managerial. It's been really interesting. It's been stretching me out as an artist to kind of understand a lot more of what it takes to get something off the ground and get a concept rolling. So, because directing projects I have done loosely, mostly for my own, but now I'm actually directing most of these projects as well as doing everything else. So it's been really, really interesting to, I guess, wear so many hats at once has definitely been trying. I think I'm growing in a very different way, which I think is good.
Now, where you are now is a far departure from where you started. Initially, you went to college up in Toronto, I believe, yes?
Yep.
To pursue 3D animation.
I went to school in Toronto for 3D animation at the Art Institute of Toronto, which may it rest in peace. But I started out as a 3D animator. I worked in Buffalo, working on TV shows and commercials and stuff like that. And then I eventually ended up being a director and animator at Four Directions Productions, which in Oneida, New York, which is actually creating these Native American legends, taking these Native American legends for the Oneida Indian Nation and turning them into 3D animated films to preserve their culture, which was really great. I did that for about 4.5 years. My interest in cinematography has always been strong ever since I was a little kid. The only reason I never got into it was because I looked at video cameras. I said, that looks like crap. And I looked at movie cameras and I was like, that's what I want. So I could never afford one, so I never did it. But then with the whole advent of DSLRs, I'm like, this is the closest thing I have ever seen to the look or feel of a film camera. So I got one and shot a little music video for my brother just goofing around. And the cinematographer at Four Directions saw it and said, hey, man, you ever interested in working with me? And I was like, oh, my God, hell yeah. So and then I just started training under him. And then after that, the rest is history. I went off on my own and just started shooting and learning. And then I did that for a couple of years. And then actually I met the host of our show today, Sean Schaefer, and started working with him and learned so much working with him. It's been a great experience. But yeah, so moving from 3D animation through onto cinematography has been very interesting because it has given me a skill set that has been very coveted in this area, to be able to have not just the camera and lighting abilities on set, but to also have the post-production and the animation and motion graphics, a handle on that as well.
So, you really are a bit of a multimedia making machine, because aside from cinematography, animation, motion graphics, you are also a musician as well, yes?
Minimalistically, yes. In my younger days, I was much more into it. But yes, today I still do a lot of music, which actually in the music video area has gotten a lot of musicians interested in having me do music videos for them, because I very much understand the music side as well as the live action side.
So stemming off of that, then, when you approach a project, because you have all these parts of your brain that can kind of light up with creativity as to what you know and what you can do. Like when you're shooting something, are you also thinking about, okay, the motion graphics go here, the editing is like this, and this is the type of song that I hear playing? Like, do you mesh all of those together when approaching a project?
100%. Absolutely. Every single project. And a lot of them, because now I'm even coming up with the concepts for them. Like the concepts are coming from me and also from the wonderful team that I have the privilege to work with. But a lot of that stuff is just determined right from the beginning. There's a commercial that I did was for the Alcon Retina Film Festival, which is pretty much all these surgeons coming together, these retina surgeons from all over the world coming together to one location to just talk about like the cutting edge of their craft and the new things that are coming out. All their ads have been very unsuccessful in the past, and I had this idea of adding a slight bit of humor to it, and they were very reluctant. But because they believed in me, because I actually worked with them on something else, they trusted me with it. It was actually one of their most successful ad campaigns they've ever had, and all of it was just like you said. It was all thought out from the beginning. The moment I had the concept and I pitched it to him, I had the music down, the animation, the video from previous ones were going to come up. It comes up, the guy's in an operating table. He lifts his head up, and there's an operating TV, and it shifts over to previous footage. All that stuff was all determined. The type of goofy music was all thought of from the very beginning.
It's great. I mean, and outside of the agency world, you mentioned you yourself being a cinematographer. You do have a couple of really nice titles under your belt, being Altered Hours and the Albany Patroons documentary that you acted as lead cinematographer on both of those projects. But to this point, what has been, I guess, the most rewarding project, you think?
Like overall, or would you say just it over it?
Overall, looking at now your body of work in all the different facets that you've performed in as a cinematographer, an editor, 3D animator, motion graphics, anything, what would you have to say is the project that sticks out to you?
It's really hard to answer because I can't express how thankful I am for every single project I have worked on. I have learned so much on every single one of them. And really, I think that's really what's most impactful and most important for me is what you get to learn from it. Notoriety and all that stuff, that's all great. And maybe someday that'll happen. Honestly, at this point, I just focus on like what I learned and the different people I got to connect with and work with. I'd probably have to say the Albany Patroons doc, which is called the Minor League Mecca. This was a really cool project because I got to work with some really, really great people. You being one of them. I got to meet all different kinds of people. I had to change how I would light or approach a situation based on budget, based on time. And many times I had lots of budget and lots of time to focus in on things, which was just wonderful, which I think visually reflects in the film, where in some other projects in the past, the budget has actually been so challenging, it would actually restrict a project from being creative, but which would also create creative ways to achieve something, which would have its own reward. So like I said, it's so hard to pick just one, but I'd probably have to say that one because it also spanned over the course of about 2.5, 3 years. I had the pleasure of working with so many different people and so many different crews all around the U.S. while working on this project. So it was a really cool project to be a part of.
What would you say is the best advice that anybody has given you coming up in your career?
That's a really tough one.
Let's say someone's listening to the show and they want to follow a similar path. I guess what advice would you then give them?
I would probably say a couple things. One, stay true to what you want to do. And that doesn't mean that whatever it is you're doing now or you originally wanted to do, stick with that. Because our paths can definitely go down different roads to bring us ultimately to where we're meant to be. If you went to school to do something and you're really feeling led to go in another direction, be true to that, like what you're really feeling. I think staying true to what you really should be doing is probably what I would say. And however you do it, especially at least I can only speak to my area of expertise, college is not necessary anymore. Maybe it used to be, but I look at resumes all the time, and I very, very rarely look at where they went to school. It all depends on the work that they outputted and how well that speaks. So if you have the passion, you can really carve your own way in this industry by just pushing forward and finding any resource you can. If you're passionate about it, man, don't give up. If you don't have the money to go to school, don't worry about it. You don't need it anymore. You can do something with your iPhone, for God's sakes. I mean, look at Steven Soderbergh.
I never attended any film school, and I've been doing this now for it'll be 17 years in May. So
yeah.
So now looking ahead, what do you have coming in 2019?
Well, 2019, I'm not sure. I'm going to continue doing the work at Over It and stuff like that. But I have a story that I've been writing for, I'd say probably about a year. Nah, maybe a little longer than a year. Coming back to it. It's really getting to a point now where I really, really want to make it. It would be a short film, but I'm getting to the point where I really feel like, man, I really want to make this. After all the things I've been kind of just, the experience I have been accumulating, I really want to just put that all together and just make a film, make my own like narrative story that's not something that's based on advertising or anything like that. Still working on funding, but my hope is that by 2019 or 2020, I can just come out with something that can hopefully touch people. I'm really interested in making something that might uplift someone or give them some, hope in some way, shape, or form. So I'm hoping that I can make a film that can do that, but who knows?
Are we going to have an opportunity as a general audience to check out the minor league Mecca this year?
This year, it's hard to say. Right now, that film, we've been fighting for about 4 years to get rights to some ESPN footage from the old games, and they just got it. So now they're scrambling to because we had a premiere and it went very, very, very well. But now we have some missing footage that we have desperately wanted for a long time. So now we have the permission to use it. So now they are splicing that into the film and getting that in different places. And I think it's actually making some other points that might be worth revisiting some interviews. So I don't know. Some things are up in the air at this point. I think they're looking for it to be out this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's closer to 2020.
Okay. But if anybody does want to check out Solomon's work as a cinematographer, Altered Hours is available now. What platforms can an audience check out Altered Hours on?
Oh my goodness. There's a lot, at least initially. I believe they're all still up, but originally I believe it was like Comcast, like DirecTV stuff. But Amazon is probably the easiest. If you have Prime, you can get it on Amazon. It's on Google Play. I believe it's also on iTunes. So there's many different ways you can see it. But if you have Amazon Prime, you can watch it pretty much for free.
Or if you're like me and like to hold things physically, you can purchase a DVD or Blu-ray of the film as well, right?
Yes, you can, and which I have, which was I have to say that was definitely an experience. The first time holding something actually distributed and manufactured that you had a hand in your hands, it was just kind of like, wow, that's kind of cool.
So just to wrap up, and I want to thank you for coming on and talking a little bit about yourself with us, is how can people connect with you? How can they get in touch with you, or how can they check out some of your work?
Well, I oftentimes post my work or snippets from my work on Facebook and Instagram. You can check me out there, and that's probably the best way to check me out. My website, unfortunately, is a little out of date, but there is contact information on there too as well.
And are there particular social media handles for either Twitter or Instagram that people should check out?
So my Instagram is Nero_minded_productions, which is quite a bit. I apologize, but that's how you can find me out. And I also have a Nero Minded Productions page on Facebook, or you can just add me personally, Solomon Nero, on Facebook. I'm pretty open to anyone as long as you're not a dingleberry.
And I'll be sure to put pertinent links in the episode description as well when the episode comes out for anybody who wants to check out some of Solomon's work or get in touch with him. All right, well, thank you very much, Solomon, and we're going to get back into the countdown now. But I do appreciate you taking the time to talk a bit with us about what you do.
Great, thanks.
Number 5.
So we're going to get back into the countdown now, and we're at number 5 now, which is the first new release of the week. And that is Happy Death Day to You from Universal, taking in $9.8 million on 3,207 screens. The film had a per-screen average of just over $3,000 and has brought its cume up to $13.5 million as the film was released on Wednesday on a $9 million budget. Happy Death Day to You, its opening weekend is far less than the original Happy Death Day, which came out in October, prime time for a horror film to come out. That film opened to $26 million. This film opened to $9.8 million, but with a $9 million budget and a cume of $13.5 million, it tends to be the formula. A genre horror film is typically made for around that $9 or $10 million budget range. But seeing this film come out in February, whereas the predecessor came out in October, what do you think that says on the studio's behalf of its confidence in the film to perform?
I think that was a gross error on their part. If this was a strategic choice to have it released at this time, it obviously shows, because those numbers are probably not performing to what they expected. I'm sure they expected a little bit less because it is a sequel, and typically sequels, unless you're, Star Wars or something, you're probably not going to have as big of a reaction. But at the same time, it feels like, that's a pretty big drop in opening weekend numbers and just overall numbers in general. But again, these types of films, yeah, there's definitely like a certain type of market for them, and you got to market when they're most well, the other thing is you're going to get that market. The people that really like them, you're going to get them. But if you're going to get other people who are kind of dabbling in that market, you got to get it when they're in the mood, and that's definitely not this time of year.
I mean, it seems like this is when a studio would take a chance on releasing a film in the horror genre or the family film genre and hopes that it sticks.
Right.
Earlier, this year we had Escape Room from Sony, which they put out and has grossed over $100 million, worldwide. That stuck. It's going to get a sequel, but they released it in January, which is typically the time that studios just kind of throw whatever they got out there, because most people are checking out award season holdovers and nominees and award winners. Usually it doesn't happen with a sequel. If your original came out in October and performed as so well to warrant a sequel, you think you would want to release the sequel in the same time frame, especially like you said, people have to be in the mood. People are in the mood to see scary movies in October. I mean, that was a formula that worked so very well for the Saw franchise, the Paranormal Activity franchise, all October releases. So to see a film go from a primetime slot and its sequel get the quiet release slot, I would like to have sat in on the meeting with Universal when they decided, you know what, Happy Death Day to You, I'm going to put out in February.
Yeah, we really think that this is going to coincide with Valentine's Day very well.
I mean, looking ahead at how it's going to perform, I mean, obviously at a $9 million budget, already having $13.5 million in the bank domestically and another $11.8 million in the bank foreign. So it's already got $25.3 million just in 5 days of release. Be curious to see if Universal decides to make it a trilogy, and if they do, what time frame do you release in?
Well, hopefully they learn their lesson, and maybe this is a little bit closer to fall. If this one does well, if they could come up with a good gimmick, at least in the trailer, and have that coincide with that time frame, I think they'll have a very successful trilogy if they do that. But yeah, hopefully they learn from this experience.
It's funny you mentioned on how the film's received, because the film actually has a 66% on Rotten Tomatoes.
That's not bad.
From critics, not audience. From critics.
That's very interesting.
That's higher than The Upside. That's higher than Glass. That's higher than Prodigy. That's very odd for a horror film to be so critically well received, I guess. And it's going to be on CinemaScore, so audience members by and large like it. So obviously the film's profitable. It should warrant a third film. Universal just have a decision to make on what time frame seems to suit the film best.
Yeah. Well, obviously it's not dependent on that because it's obviously making money, like you were saying, but I think it'll definitely help its case.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 4.
So moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 4. Down from number 2 this week is What Men Want from Paramount. The film took in $10.9 million, only a 40% drop from last week. The film's theater count held steady at 2,912 for a per-screen average of $3,750. The film has brought its cume up to $36.1 million in its second week of release on a $20 million budget. This film, a comedy from Paramount starring Taraji P. Henson and Tracy Morgan, seemingly performing well. I mean, only a 40% drop weekend over weekend, which is admirable for any film. Usually you find a 50% drop is the norm. Maybe it has something to do with this being a holiday weekend with President's Day on Monday. More people are getting out to the theaters, leading into what is typically a vacation week for most of the kids at school. Not that this is a film that I'm taking school children to, but looking at What Men Want, which is a remake of the 2001 Mel Gibson film with Helen Hunt called What Women Want, is just a gender swap of the main roles in the film and the approach to it. And as I said last week, honestly, I mean, the idea of it, when I first saw the trailers for it, I'm like, wow, they managed to make a whole feature-length film on What Men Want. I feel like that could have been a short film or a Super Bowl commercial.
Yeah, it's yeah. Mm-hmm. I think the reason why What Women Want worked, at least in my opinion, is because women are definitely, especially by men, can be seen as a mystery. Where men, we're pretty straightforward. We're pretty easy to predict, pretty easy to read. We have a couple things that maybe frustrate women, but
only a couple?
Well, it's usually a couple base things that spread off into multiple things. It's just the root.
It's funny. I remember watching What Women Want and looking at it, I'm like, okay, so this is going to answer all my questions. And I had no answers. I had no answers at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I was still just as clueless, and just very lucky and fortunate that I found someone willing to spend their life with me and my wife, because I can't read, and I can't read her for anything. I can't read women in general for anything. So I was upset when that movie came out, thinking that it was going to be the answer to all my questions, and I just left with more questions.
I thought I did, and maybe that's why I'm single.
Looking at this film, I mean, is comedy, which tends to play well, especially this time of year when everything seems to be revolving around award season, which typically award season films are much more morose, somber, and serious. So comedy is a nice thing for people to get out and see, especially in the wintertime as well, when everyone feels cooped up and gets cabin fever, just to get a good laugh in. And I think that lends itself to a lot of the success of the film, but I'll be curious to see how this film performs moving forward. But what are your thoughts on this particular film, or is this something that you'd want to check out? Did you see What Women Want with Mel Gibson and Helen Hunt?
Oh yeah, that's a classic in my mind. I thought that was a really fun film, and probably even like maybe even a little racy and a little. We've become a very politically sensitive culture, so some of the jokes in there are just like, ooh, geez. They got away with that then, but now probably not. This film doesn't really interest me very much. I again feel like this might be one of those like, hey, what do we do that's worked in the past? Let's just rework it and see what it does. I kind of felt like that's what was going with this, so I'm interested to see what people have to genuinely think if it's a good movie or a poor movie. I mean, the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes are not too hot. 45 on the critic score, 51 on the audience score. Like I said, typically I not every time, but typically I fall right in between the two, so that's pretty low to begin with when it comes to where my opinion would probably end up landing. But like you said, there's really not much for men's thought processes are usually not that complicated, at least to the point where women at least from the women I've spoken to, don't find it too much of a mystery. I think that was the big appeal with What Women Want and why that was a successful movie, where in this case, I just think it was just this could be a fun comedy, but not for the same reasons.
Right. I mean, this may be more of a comedy geared towards poking fun at just the simplicity of, generally we think.
That probably is a good angle. I can't think of a better angle. That's probably a good one.
Number 3.
All right, so moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 3. It's our second new release of the week, and that's Isn't It Romantic from New Line, taking in $14.2 million on 3,444 screens. The film averaged just over $4,100 per screen and has a cume now of $20.4 million, as this was another film that opened on Wednesday alongside Happy Death Day to You. Now, this film, perfect timing for this. We talked about, people have to be in the mood to see certain genres of film. We're talking about with Happy Death Day to You and the original being released in October when people want to see horror films. February is certainly prime time with Valentine's Day to release a romantic comedy date movie, and that's what we get here with Isn't It Romantic. Solomon, are you a rom-com fan? What are your thoughts on the genre? Or...
I think the genre is like the tropes you could pretty much call out from a mile away. You could predict pretty much the whole movie very early on, but that doesn't mean that the ride isn't fun. This one, I saw the preview for this, and this actually I wouldn't mind. I don't think I would go see it in theaters, like just because of how busy I am, but to see it like in my own terms, I'd be interested to see this one because it looks very fun. It looks very fun, and because it's actually, I think one of the things I liked about it is it's actually picking on those exact tropes and stereotypes of the entire genre, which is why I think it could be really funny. It's just a very self-aware film.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that John Romy and I discussed when we were talking about actually the next entry in our countdown, which is the Lego Movie, is people seem to get a real kick out of comedies that are self-aware.
Yeah.
I mean, that was part of the whole reason why the Scary Movie franchise lasted as long as it did, was it was very self-aware of its genre and making fun of it. And we haven't had something like that in a while, like a scary movie, or they made, I think, superhero movie and action movie, and they made all these different quote-unquote genre and then movie where they poke fun at it. So it's been a while since we had something like that. And so Isn't It Romantic kind of really comes at a time when enough times pass where we haven't had one in a while, and here's one that's being done in a genre that usually pokes fun at itself because it follows all the same tropes. And now this is a film making fun of the genre within a film. So
right.
I think it'll work really well. I mean, Rebel Wilson's a very comedic actress and does really well in roles like this. So I think she's right in her wheelhouse with this one. It has a good per screen average, had a good opening 5-day frame so far. Based on the numbers, it's got a 69% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got a B on Cinema Score. So feeling favorable all around. Now, will people still feel as motivated to go check out this film next weekend when the post, Valentine's Day have to take everyone out on a date time has passed? We'll see.
We'll definitely see. I think it could hold some water. What else is on the docket for romance or comedies in theaters right now?
Does the defense's case hold water? Just a quick aside for people listening that may get that reference. Any reference I throw out, Solomon gets because he speaks fluent movie quotes.
Actually, Sean bought me a shirt years ago for Christmas, and it literally said that very thing. It said, I speak fluent movie quotes, and it's probably the most apropos or accurate shirt anyone's ever gotten me. If anyone knows me, I'm constantly quoting movies. Constantly. It's bad. I apologize to everyone who doesn't speak movie quotes.
Yes, Solomon he's a serial nerderer.
Oh, you're even taking my terminology too. I love it. It's great.
So, but looking at Isn't It Romantic next week, I think even at a traditional 50% drop, I mean, that still keeps it well within the top 10. It does look fun. It looks like a fun movie. And the last romantic comedy we really had in the countdown was Second Act with Jennifer Lopez, which came out last month. And Jennifer Lopez and Julia Roberts constantly battle for the uncrowned queen of the romantic comedy film. So it's nice to see someone else getting into the mix like Rebel Wilson. And this is a good product for her to hopefully do some more projects like this.
Number 2.
All right, so moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 2. Down from number 1 this week is the Lego Movie 2, the second part from Warner Brothers. Last week's box office champ dropped 37.8% from last weekend, taking in $21.2 million. Still on 4,303 screens, a lot of screens to be on. But with a per-screen average of $4,930 per screen, it has brought its cume up to $62.6 million now in its second week of release. All those numbers seem to be adding up pretty well to what one would consider a successful film, but looking at it side by side with its other Lego brethren, being the first Lego movie, Lego Batman, and Lego Ninjago, Lego Movie 2 is looking like it's going to fall short of essentially all of them except for Lego Ninjago, since that's more of a smaller niche of the Lego universe. And I'm kind of curious why that is, because this film seemed to offer up and promise all the same fun and, again, being that self-aware comedy poking fun at being Legos. And what are your thoughts on the Lego Movie 2, Solomon?
Honestly, I haven't seen it, but it looks like it'll be really fun. I personally think the contributing factor could be the time of year. I mean, this is not the biggest time of year. It's not the worst time of year to go see a movie, but it's not the most popular time of year.
Well, see, actually, that's the thing, is that the first one came out 5 years ago, almost to the day.
Really? It did? Look at that.
So the first one was released February 7th, 2014. Lego Batman was released February 10th, 2017. So they're all being released at the same time frame, but the first Lego movie went on to make $257 million domestically. Lego Batman made $175 million domestically. And here we are with Lego Movie 2, which probably won't even crack $100 million domestically. So it's not the release time frame.
No, that's not it.
Definitely was not marketing. This film was marketed everywhere. I just don't know. I mean, maybe one Lego movie was enough. Lego Batman was funny because Batman was one of the funniest characters of the first Lego movie, so he gets his spinoff. And maybe it's just already in only the fourth film of this universe already having franchise fatigue.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense if you look at it. I just wonder if the Lego Batman movie, if that didn't come out, or if the Ninjago movie didn't come out, I wonder what the numbers would be if it was just several years later and the Lego Movie 2 came out. Because it feels like maybe it's just too much all at once. I mean, if you look, they're pretty consistently back to back, not every year, but almost. It's like I think the reason why, I mean, the only thing I can compare it to is like Marvel when it comes to that type of thing. Marvel has been like consistently releasing films like every year, just about. And it's like, I feel like Lego is feeling confident enough to do that same type of thing, and maybe the franchise isn't that strong. Now, granted, everyone I've spoken to has said that this movie's great. It's so fun, so it's definitely not the story. I just think it's just people are just kind of like, oh yeah, another Lego movie.
I think what hurt it was actually the Lego Ninjago movie, because okay, you had Lego Movie. It was an original idea to put together this film. Okay, fine. Then you had Lego Batman, which was, a spin-off and getting a little bit further away from the core of this Lego universe they're creating. But then, Lego Ninjago, yes, it's been a long-running television series, but its fan base, I don't think, in that story is really big enough to warrant its own film. Maybe that should have been a direct-to-Netflix release. Maybe that should have been, direct-to-video. And I think kids clamoring to go see these Lego movies, and the parents take the kids and thinking it's going to be, wow, it's going to be like Lego movie. It's going to be like Lego Batman. And then they go to Lego Ninjago. And I saw Lego Ninjago because my daughter loves Lego Ninjago. And while she enjoyed it, there were definitely kids in that theater who were just like, is it over yet? Can we go home yet?
That makes a lot more sense because I had not seen Lego Ninjago, and that definitely sounds right. Because really, the fatigue is more on the parents, really, if you think about it, than the kids, because they're the ones that are really taking these kids to go see these things. I think the reason why the Lego movie did so well is because it didn't just appeal to kids. Like, I mean, as an adult, I love that movie. I thought that movie was such a now movie. The humor was very much now. Like, I don't think it would have been nearly as funny 10 years ago from when it was released. But once it came out, it was great. And that was one of the things why I think it did so well, is the humor was just so on point.
I enjoyed Lego Movie immensely. I even enjoyed Lego Batman because the whole running theme of it was a very subversive adult theme about relationships, and like the kid just escaped the kids, but I picked up on it.
Right.
And then Lego Ninjago was like, oh my God, why am I watching this? Because I've watched episodes of Lego Ninjago with my daughter, and they abandon a lot of the storyline in the television series for this movie. So even she was a little bit confused at points as to what was going on. And as a parent, I know full well the fatigue as a parent you get seeing these kids movies. Perfect example, took my daughter to see A Dog's Way Home yesterday.
Oh my God.
Suffered through that for 90 minutes.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry, man.
She enjoyed it, but I cannot stand seeing films like A Dog's Way Home. It just doesn't appeal to me at all. And so since the parents are the ones who really have the power and they're the ones with the wallet and paying for the tickets, they do get quite a bit of say in whether a kid sees a movie at the theater or a kid sees a movie on DVD or Netflix.
No, that's definitely a huge factor. I think that's probably what hurt this film.
So before we get into our number one of the things I wanted to kind of quickly get your opinion on and chat about was a lot of news was made of the Academy choosing to disclude 4 categories from their live broadcast this year. And those 4 categories were Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Best Live Action Short, and Best Makeup and Hairstyling, which resulted in a complete outrage from the industry. Now, since then, the Academy has reversed that decision. They will be broadcasting all 24 categories live, but I really feel the damage has been done at this point. It really, to me, as a cinematographer, and hopefully to you as well, it really says a lot to me as to what the Academy's stance is and view of the importance of something like cinematography and editing. I mean, I feel that the damage has been done at this point. I mean, it went so far as the ASC, the American Society of Cinematographers, came right out and said, look, we will boycott and protest the Academy Awards. We refuse to stand by and have our members seemingly disrespected like that. Solomon, as both a cinematographer and an editor, does this upset you? How does this make you feel to hear about the Academy choosing to do this? And what does it say to the industry?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, of course I was upset. Anyone in the industry who puts their heart and soul into this stuff is definitely going to be upset. But really, are we surprised is my counter question. I feel like in today's society, the actors and the directors, just, people in the limelight are so, they're just carried on everyone's shoulders. And not even so much the directors, it's mostly the actors and people who are usually on the front facing part. So I'm not that surprised at all that they tried to cut this to make time, because really it's another business. Even this award show is another business. The whole idea is to get advertisers, they're looking at last year's viewership and it's like, hey, this isn't working so well. We need to, cut this down and have this, we need to get more viewership up so we can get more ads viewed. It's not all about the craft, and I hate saying it, but it really it's about money. It's really what I think it comes down to. But now I think a lot of people are going to watch these because now it is all inclusive. So this little controversy may have actually helped them, but also hurt them in the long run, because it's like, yeah, it's back. Okay, now I can watch it. Where even some people were probably like, I probably wouldn't even watch it this year. But now that there's a controversy surrounding it, maybe now is the time to watch it. It was a tell. It's like you're playing cards. It's a tell. We now know what hands, what cards are in your hand, and the importance of what you and I do and what other people do. It's like, yes, there are a lot of editors and a lot of cinematographers out there. And I feel like because we're not so front facing, if Roger Deakins was replaced with, I'm trying to think of, anyway, if it was replaced by you, I think there'd be very few people who would be upset, at least in comparison to if Jason Momoa was replaced with I don't know, I'm trying to think of some arbitrary actor, I guess, just someone who's just up and coming in Hollywood, in a franchise that is already well established. People would go crazy. People would lose their minds, and that's just because that's the front facing, that's the part that they associate with. So I look at this and I'm like, I'm not that surprised. There's a lot of different cinematographers and editors out there. It's like, yeah, we're giving people this, but the appeal is not to the vast audience majority. The majority of the audience is going to be looking at the actors and actresses. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. And it's not like, hey, guys, I mean, these people busted hump to make these projects too. Probably more so than what people know. I think they deserve recognition. So I think first and foremost that should be the focus of the Academy. But obviously, I don't think it is.
I mean, but looking at specific categories that they chose, I mean, mind you, there's 24 categories. And I'm not saying that necessarily any one category is less important than the other, because like you said, everyone was involved in all those projects. It meant something to them. It meant everybody who gets into this industry at one point or another thinks in their head what their acceptance speech is going to be someday if they win an Academy Award. I mean, everybody's done it. They're practicing in the shower, or, standing in front of the bathroom mirror. It's like, it happens.
I'm learning a lot about you, Sean.
Yes. I've worked out mine over and over again. I'm never going to get a chance to say it, but I've worked it out to the nth degree.
Hey, never say never.
If they went through with it and excluded these categories, then I could say never, because only the people in that auditorium were ever going to know what my acceptance speech would be.
Right.
I'm not saying that any category is less important than another, but these actors that you're talking about, these directors, the director's vision would not have been as well achieved if it was just anybody as a cinematographer.
Absolutely.
The actors and actresses, if the editor chose bad takes, their performance would have been weaker. If they just went au naturel for their hair and makeup on screen and didn't have someone fussing over them for 4 hours before call time and for every waking moment on set during the shoot, that would have an impact as well. So a film as a whole is many, many cogs all working together, and they all have to work for the machine to run, for the movie to work. And so to be so selective, and not just selective, but be so selective of people who are heads of their departments, to be like, yeah, we're going to exclude you. You're not important enough to make our 3-hour broadcast. And let's be honest. Okay, last year's broadcast was 3 hours and 53 minutes. Taking out those 4 categories doesn't cut 53 minutes out of your broadcast. Maybe having less like cutaway segments, which without a host, the show's already going to be shorter. And I get it. It's entertainment. Maybe you don't have to have every nominee for Best Original Song come out there and perform it. I don't know. I feel like there was many, many other ways they could have cut time. But like you said, showing their hand like this and by saying, well, yeah, we were selective. We decided to cut our categories from 24 to 20, and these 4 categories get the axe. It's insulting. It's insulting to me because I immediately was like, well, I'm not going to watch the Oscars this year.
Yeah.
And you know what? Even though the categories are back in, I still may not, because they only reverse the decision because they were forced to, and they're going to be boycotted by their peers. And it's one thing for an audience not to tune in. It's another thing for your peers not to show up.
Right. Very true.
How does the Academy fix this now? Can they mend this wound that they've made with the industry?
I think they can only, put a Band-Aid on it, which I think they have. But I mean, the wound's still going to be there. And yeah, they show their hand. That's it. We got a little peek behind there, and their priorities are just very front and center now. And I don't know how they can ever repair that. But you're also talking to a guy that I rarely watch them. I usually watch highlights afterwards. So I mean, I also never really liked the over glorification of these types of things. It almost feels like animals competing for a trophy, or I don't know. I always liked speeches where they would say something like, this isn't, I was just doing this because I love it, and it's like, and they just happen to get this award. I feel like that's how these awards should be anyway.
And I agree. I mean, really, you don't get into the industry to win an award. You do it because you love it. I get it. But for someone who works and toils their entire career, just to have that 90 seconds of recognition by their peers, their colleagues, and the audiences who show up to the movies that they work on, it's important. It means something to them as an individual. It makes you feel good for someone to say that, they appreciate you and what you do. At its core, the award is a symbol of, appreciation, a symbol of acknowledgement by your peers. For a committee made up of your peers and your colleagues to say, you know what, we appreciate you, but not enough to give you your moment. Like that hurts. That stings.
No, I agree very much. very much.
I don't know. I'm glad that the Academy reversed their decision. I'm glad that we're going to get to see all 24 categories. I do think, however, that in the midst of all this controversy of cutting categories out, they are leaving one very important faction of the industry out, and they need to acknowledge them. And that is the stunt men and women of this industry.
Oh, yeah.
There is no category for them. And these are people who are literally putting their lives on the line on set. They deserve to be recognized. So if anything, make it 25 categories, add a stunt category, or make it a stunt person or stunt ensemble category, but something. Because while we're feeling bad as cinematographers and editors that we're being left off to a commercial break, like they must feel completely disowned by the industry because they're not even getting an award. And so if anything, the Academy needs to make room for one more and acknowledge our stunt people.
Yeah.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 1.
All right, so here we are. We are at number 1 now. Coming in at number 1 this week, and its opening frame is Alita, Battle Angel from Fox, taking in $27.8 million on 3,790 screens. It had a per-screen average of 7,335 and has brought its cume up to $36.5 million. This film was released on Thursday of this week. It has a budget reported of $170 million. So this is the first real big budgeted film of 2019. So to see a $27.8 million opening, probably not the best sign of things from Fox. But as I've said the last couple of weeks, I really think that Fox is given up at this point. They're just waiting it out until the takeover from Disney's made official. So I think they're just kind of just rolling out whatever's on their slate that they have left at this point. This is a film I'm actually going to see later today because I'm a fan of this particular intellectual property based on an anime, and I think the players involved are great. I mean, you've got James Cameron involved as a producer, Robert Rodriguez directing it. It seems to have all the pieces in place, but this kind of goes back to something that we were talking about earlier is the story there? I mean, something that's got a lot of flash and style is great, but I think a story is what draws you into it. This was the problem that, when we were discussing Aquaman, is that Aquaman was a lot of style and very little substance.
Yeah, absolutely. My first observation, I saw a preview for this film over a year ago, but I do imagine in my head James Cameron sitting down with Robert Rodriguez, and Robert Rodriguez just saying, James, how do I want to have like a big movie? All these films you've done, they're just so big. How do I do it? And James Cameron just looks at him and says 2 words: big eyes.
But they're not as big anymore. People got so mad in the early test screenings, they had to go back and reduce the size of her eyes.
Aside from that, this film does look very, very, very interesting. And again, I can't help but find myself going back to the Rotten Tomatoes scores, which is not anything in ironclad, proven strong or anything. But currently right now, the tomato meter is at 58%, and the audience score is at 92%. So I really feel like the story is going to be decent, but it's just going to have a lot more audience, like, appealing kind of stuff, which, I mean, that's kind of like James Cameron's earmark. I mean, his stories are never like anything too original. I mean, like, look at Avatar. That story was essentially like Ferngully and
Pocahontas.
I mean, you could just rattle them off, and he just kind of mashed them all together with this science fiction kind of feel to it. And it did so well because the appeal was more to the mass audiences. It wasn't necessarily to make a good film. And the thing is, what's that mean, a good film? Isn't a mass audience appeal make it a good film? I don't think so. Like, yeah, that's a part of it. So I feel like this could be a really fun movie, but also just maybe have a couple of weak story points that might make it just kind of like where you're sitting there like, wait, why would you? I don't know. It's hard to say. You're going to have to let me know what you think, because I really, really, really want to see this one. I've been waiting a while to see this one.
I'm certainly looking forward to it. I've been waiting since I saw that first trailer. But looking at beyond what this film could be, talking about things are a business. Alita, it's never going to get bigger than this. $27.8 million is going to be the biggest weekend it takes.
Right.
At a $170 million budget. No one releases movies in February and expects them to be huge. I mean, I know what they were going for. They're hoping to have massive success like Black Panther did last year that released this same holiday weekend. There's other films that came out this holiday weekend that put up very impressive numbers, but this wasn't going to be one of them. This just wasn't.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm happy that Alita won the weekend. It's number 1. great. I'm happy that it's finally out so I can see it. But this is going to lose Fox so much money. Just so much money.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a very interesting decision. When I saw this was coming out this time of year, I was like, hey, that's cool. It's sooner, but wow. What a bad decision. I mean, like, I think the reason why Black Panther did well is because it had a lot of politically interesting things about it, which made it very exciting for a lot of people. Where with this film, it just looks like it could be a really good movie, just maybe releasing at not the best financial time. What are the numbers in the foreign gross? Are those out yet?
It's got 94.3 million foreign so far. So worldwide, it's at $130.8 million.
I think that this movie actually might not do as bad as you think. I think it might break even. Like when all's said and done, like I think it might make double what it actually the budget was, which will probably just mean they're just going to break even.
I mean, there's still two major markets to open in. On February 22nd, the film will open in China and in Japan.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised. It's like, I don't know what they're culturally, what they would think. They may go crazy for it.
Interesting little statistic just popped up on my computer here. Actually, Alita it leads the worst President's Day weekend at the box office in 15 years.
Oh, ouch.
So cumulatively, the box office on President's Day weekend has not performed this poorly in 15 years, which is saying something. And I'm not going to put it all on Alita as its fault. I think you're right. I think this was not the right time to release this film.
Yeah.
People waited this long. They could have waited a little bit longer.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take. And for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
We have two wide releases, one an expansion next week. First is How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World from Universal, which is going to open on over 4,000 screens. This is the third and reportedly final chapter in this franchise. And also Fighting with My Family from MGM is going to expand from the 4 theaters that opened in New York and LA this week to over 2,500 screens next week. Fighting with My Family, obviously a biopic of sorts of WWE superstar Paige and her upbringing in a very wrestling-oriented family. Her mother and father, both not only performers, but ran their own wrestling promotion in England. And it looks at her rise from dealing with that dysfunctional family, growing up through making her way into the WWE. So it's no question to me that How to Train Your Dragon is going to be number 1 next week.
Right.
But how will How to Train Your Dragon impact the field of films that we've talked about this week, next week?
We pretty much only have the Lego movie, I think, kind of in contention for that type of spot. So I could definitely see that hurting that movie, considering it's already not doing as well as its predecessors, which leads us to believe that maybe there is some fatigue in that franchise. The How to Train Your Dragon series has been very, very well received. So I think this one has a great chance to do very, very well in theaters, especially, again, that's all relative to this time of year. I don't know. It's hard to say where else. What do you think?
I certainly think it'll impact the Lego movie. I think that's going to be the biggest film that gets hurt by it. But I do feel it's going to be number 1. I think knowing going into it as part of the marketing that this is the final chapter of this franchise is going to play a big role in just how big of an opening weekend it has.
Right.
So now, when we were talking before we started recording, I mentioned this Fighting with My Family film, and you had mentioned you were familiar at least a little bit with the title, having had seen a trailer for it, I believe. So are you surprised at all with the fact that it's getting such a large expansion for being such kind of a really select audience that it's playing to?
It's very surprising, but I think, you got Mr. The Rock backing this film, who, of course, is just such a big, he's just beloved by Hollywood. And I do not like WWE. And I know that's been a thing with you and me. I know you love it very much, and I almost pick on you for it. But seeing this film, watching the trailer, it's very interesting. I definitely want to see it. So I think that might be it. Just the appeal of the story, just being such a strange, unique story and situation. That's probably the biggest appeal. And so it is a little surprising. At the same time, it's not that surprising because it actually looks very interesting. It has piqued my interest.
It almost comes across as a completely fictional story.
Right.
They almost present it in a way like, hey, let's take this person who grew up in a family of wrestlers and we're going to take her through her whole life, and then she's going to get this opportunity to go to the WWE. Like, this is what actually happened. This is Paige's, life. But the marketing definitely feels like this is just a story that they've made up and The Rock's in it.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. It wasn't until the end of the trailer, or I read somewhere else where it said that it was based on a true story. And I was just like, oh, okay. Wow, that makes it that much more interesting.
That about wraps it up for us here this week on the Weekend Take. I want to thank Solomon Nero for coming on the show and being our special guest this week. And just real quick, Solomon, one more time, just let everyone know where they can find you or hit you up or check out some of your work and connect with you.
Yeah, you guys can find me on Facebook. You can just search Solomon Nero, all O's and Solomon. And Nero_minded_productions on Instagram. It's probably the two most places I'm active. And Sean, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
The Weekend Take is also on social media. We're on Twitter at Weekend Take, and we're on Facebook as well. So be sure to give us a like or follow there. And until next week, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show, and take care.
You've been listening to The Weekend Take. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Google Play and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.